I wanted to start here, Caroline, because I think it, first of all, captures the intensity of the particular zeitgeist that you capture in the book, which is the zeitgeist that hurls and screams and storms and argues and is upset, but also to understand the particularities of this, as you say, certain moralistic and identity-based left. Can you tell us more about what this left looks like and where you first encountered it?
First, thank you for the invitation. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to discuss those subjects, especially in a bridge between American and French culture like yours, because this is the point. I wrote that book hoping that we can have this dialogue, and of course, hoping that we can have this dialogue inside the left also. And I discovered this temptation quite recently, actually. I mean, a bit before, of course, writing the book, because for years, fighting for equality, where it is, I mean, it's my base. This is where I'm coming from. I'm coming from the fight for equal rights, for women's rights, for LGBT rights. And during those years, for me, it was absolutely obvious that the fight for equality and the fight for freedom were the same. It's like being progressive and walking on 2 feet in the same direction. But I am also a journalist. I am also a writer. I am also a director of films and script writers. So, I mean, I am extremely attached to freedom of expression. And as you can imagine, especially coming from a newspaper like Charlie Hebdo, covering the cartoons affair, facing death threats, having seen my friends being killed because of people pointing at them and calling them Islamophobe, where they were not. They were extremely talented anti-racist guy and brave ones. So, of course, I saw this poisonous polemic growing and growing and killing slowly one of the feet I was walking on, the freedom one, in the name of equality, which was the most horrifying aspect of it, because at the beginning of my career of journalist, and as also when I was a young activist, it was extremely, I mean, it was extremely enthusiastic. We were all, let's say, on the same page and all together fighting against censorship, because it was coming from Catholic fanatics, because it was coming from the church, it was coming from conservative, obviously. Censorship was, and it is supposed to come from conservative. And it's still coming from conservative. I mean, the cancel culture we'll talk about, it's not only coming from the left, it's still also coming sometimes from conservative. But it is so sad to see young people who are supposed, yes, to want to be curious, to discover, to read books, and to learn to be open-minded, refusing to talk, refusing to have certain conversation, disqualifying people based not on their ideas, which is something you can do. I mean, if some ideas are extremely disgusting, you have the right to say, this is too much. I mean, this is out of freedom of expression. This is inciting to hatred, for example. And in France, as you know, we have a clear distinction between what is really hatred and what is free speech. But refusing to discuss with people of good faith, artists, musicians, intellectuals, who, yes, maybe have disagreement, maybe are not exactly on the same page, who have probably not exactly the same opinion, and disqualifying them based on their identity and not their ideas. That is something that shocked me to my core, because for me, this is the exact opposite of the anti-racist fight. We were supposed to never, never, never again judge someone based on his identity, just on his idea.
So we can say maybe broadly that this was kind of in the air and you were feeling it here in France. And then you took a trip to America in 2016. You spent some time at Duke University and Hollands University. And so one place we can certainly say, and I want to kind of, over the course of this conversation, characterize, this left. Where do they live? How do they speak? Etc. And so where do they live? One place is at universities. You saw them at these two universities. In the book, you talk about Columbia students who were traumatized by the study of Ovid's Metamorphosis at Duke University, where you were, students offended by Alison Bechdel's Fun Home. At Yale University, two teachers are fired for having questioned the university rules about offensive Halloween costumes. Tell us about your experience at these two universities. What struck you? And I suppose you use the word horrifying. What horrified you?
Before to go there, even before being invited to speak in those universities, as you mentioned, I had some talk with my American friends, and it was becoming strange to see they were more and more petrified at the idea of speaking out. So they were telling me, no, this we cannot say it anymore outside. We can say it inside, between us. I'm speaking about people who are famous intellectuals in New York, who were looking to be completely afraid of speaking and thinking. So that was one of the first alert to me. And when I've been invited to, to give some lessons and conferences in Hollands and Duke University, honestly, I thought that speaking too much about cancel culture or a crazy new tendency in American university was a bit a French exaggeration, honestly. It was a bit too much. When I went there, my goodness, and I spent only a couple of weeks. And just in the first days, I'm used to give a class. I teach in Sciences Po Paris. And I arrived in Hollands, especially Hollands, it's a feminist university. There is only women as students. There is men and women who teach, but the students are only women. The first days, I had all the audience. The first event at night, it was a full big room of maybe 200, 300 persons. The whole small town was there, and the whole students almost were there. And we were speaking about Charlie Hebdo and freedom of speech and secularism, the whole sensitive subject. I mean, it was the whole thing first night. And of course, at the beginning, when you say to an American students audience that, yes, your friends have been killed in a terrorist attack, they are extremely compassionate, they understand, they're moved. The emotion level, we are connected. It's fine. When we move to the rational, theoretical step, speaking about what is the problem with people killing other people for freedom of speech, it's becoming more complex. Then I saw even the body language of the students was extremely, let's say, was a bit frightening because they were extremely closed. They were extremely afraid in their body language of touching those subjects. And because I tried almost everything to connect, to be a bridge between the American and the French culture, and I tried pretty much everything, and I understood that the theoretical approach doesn't work. If you invoke universalism or big principles to have the liberty of speaking, it doesn't work. So I just say, look, I'm coming from a culture that can look to you offensive. I'm French. So yes, I'm going to offend you many times. Get used to it. You know what? I'm French. And at the beginning, I think it was like I drop a bomb in the room. Yes, I'm going to offend you sometime. And slowly, I saw the body language opening, and slowly we didn't succeed to laugh very soon, but the first question coming from one of the students was, because we spoke about secularism, we spoke about the law, about forbidding religious sign inside the public schools, that is very often absolutely not understood in the US, and I understand why. And one student from the back of the assembly raised her hand and asked a question, and she said to me, look, you are a white woman, so you are speaking about the veil, and the veil is the symbol of the Muslim culture. So you are a white woman, you cannot speak about it. So I say, first, thank you so much, because I think you said in one sentence everything we have to work on. Really, honestly, everything is there. Everything is wrong to me. But we're going to talk about it. Because first you're saying that, okay, the veil is the symbol of the whole Muslims, the whole culture of Islam. That means that my Iranian friends, my Algerian friends who are fighting against it, and some have been killed to not wear it, are not Muslim to you, a white American student. You judge you that they are not Muslim enough. And you judge you, who is allowed to speak about it or not, who is allowed to be in solidarity or not with them. I'm going to tell you what, I'm never going to fail them. I'm not going to let them down. I'm always be on their side, whether you like it or not. You can be on the side of the traditionalists or the religious fanatics who are oppressing them. Be free. You are on the side of the conservative, you are on the side of the Trumpist of Islam, be free. I'm not going to apply those categories to my view of the world. I mean, I was not going to lose my job. They cannot complain. They cannot say, this was extremely offensive, cancel her or fire her. I was there for just a couple of days.
How did you talked about the sensitivity atmosphere. How did the atmosphere shift, the in-person atmosphere?
It shifted because the people, actually the days after, we had smaller groups workshop. And the conversation was becoming more free and free. The body language was actually more open. The people were actually more mixing together. And some students were knocking to the door saying, can we assist to the class? It's not our class, but we would love to. So we were searching for chairs and we were pushing the walls and it was packed, honestly. And at the end of it, when I left Hollands, the image I keep with me, it's the image of one of the students who invited me, one of the teacher who invited me, and he was crying. He was literally physically crying. I say, what is it? Because we were, okay, we had some bonds, but it was, so yeah, I'm coming back, don't worry. We will meet again, don't worry. Say, no, you don't understand, Caroline. Say, you don't understand. What you succeed to say during those days, as a teacher, I cannot say it since 10 years. I would be fired. And we stay in contact and we stay in touch. And I mean, he's more and more depressed every year. And he's a smart teacher and he's a good one and he cannot do his job. And he told me the last time I saw him, it was a couple of weeks ago. He went to Paris. He told me, you know, it's even worse than when you went. It's even worse now. I'm censoring myself all the time. I'm scared. I have 2 kids. I have to pay for their education. I cannot lose my job. So I'm going to stop. I'm just going to give them what they want. What they want is to not be disturbed by anything. And me, I'm going to keep my job. And the other person who told me that really scared me. It's one person you know, Azar Nafisi. She's a fantastic book writer. She booked that fantastic bestseller, Reading Lolita in Tehran. She's an Iranian origin teacher. She has been fired from university in Tehran because she didn't want to wear the veil. She has been refugee in the US. She's one of the most fantastic teachers in the world. And she do not teach anymore in the US universities because she's a successful writer probably. But also she told me when I asked her, she told me, you know what? I was bored of hearing my American students telling me all the time, I do not feel comfortable with it. Literature is not to give comfort. It's not a couch, actually.
Can we have a round of applause, please? This is really interesting. I mean, part of our identity, right, is the American Library in Paris, and I want to put this experience that you had in America, which is the experience that many American intellectuals are having, as we were saying before. Many are actually coming to live in Europe, mainland Europe. In kind of conversation with your experience at Sciences Po. In your prologue, you write, but again, this is a couple of years ago now, France is resisting rather well. And one of the reasons that you wanted to write this book is basically to turn to France and say, this is a threat. Do you feel that this is still true? Is France resisting rather well? Is that still the case? And are there things about France that mean that the phenomenon that's happening in America, actually it's impervious to French society?
when I published The Offended Generation, so it was just before the beginning of the pandemic, and everyone in France was telling me, you speak about examples that, I mean, it's the US, you know them, was the current reaction. It's typically American. It's not something that can touch France. I said, sorry, I disagree, because I think it's actually a postmodern phenomenon. Polarization is coming here. Everything is coming with it, because it's due to the way we are trained to inform ourselves and to debate through social network, through bias of confirmation. And we are so connected to the rest of the world, but in the same time, we are connected through circles. And we used to think through circles of people who think the same as us, and we are less and less used to be able to debate. And people who have less and less the capacity to argue, actually, they want to cancel, because they want to cover the fact that they cannot argue. If you are out of arguments, you're going to invoke the identity of the person. You will say, you cannot speak about it, or you cannot understand it. I can, end of the debate. This is actually a tool to end the conversation, but also to bully someone. This is why I cannot stand to see that sometimes it is, more often of the time, it is in the name of feminism or the name of anti-racism that should not be used and instrumentalized as tool to bully people or censor people. But yes, I think it can come to France. It's actually already partly influential in universities, because especially there is many teachers and university who are looking to the US, who want to be recognized by the US, who have exchange, also a financial exchange. I mean, you know, we were discussing about this before to start the conversation. I mean, our university in France, really, this sucks. Let's be honest about that. It's not beautiful. It's ugly. We all would love to dream about the American campus. It's so beautiful and cozy. And no, our faculties and universities, they're really ugly. But the teacher cannot be fired because it's free. It's really not costing a lot. It's really cheap. So the freedom of teaching is protected by that, the fact that the students doesn't pay so much, and that the teachers are somehow still untouchable. But there is also many teachers, because they are not winning a lot of money probably, who dream to have an American career, who can teach also in the US. So they are importing that vision, these principles with them, and they are actually feeding their students with it. So we have now a new generation of, let's say, like in the US, the most spoiled, educated, rich kids. Let's be frank. It's the most, really, yes, they are really the most privileged kids and students are definitely into that mood, and use this code and use this tendency to be even more empowered than the other, because they are the only one who have those codes. So it's coming to France for sure. I think, honestly, you can still continue to teach freely in Sciences Po. I stopped teaching a couple of years ago, but I think you continue, you can do it. But the students probably are more and more feeling, let's say, they are more and more able to bully you than before.
This is interesting to you, Caroline, because we're talking about in-person interactions, and here we're having an in-person interaction, and you spend time in the book talking about how this, and we all are aware of this, how this phenomenon has moved online. And I think what's interesting, and you make this point, but I want to hear your thoughts on it, how is the conversation online shaping the in-person conversation, and how is it the in-person conversation then going back to the online conversation? They feed off each other, but
unfortunately, yes, unfortunately, we should try to reverse it. I mean, university for me, schools are supposed to resist to the way we debate on social networks. We are supposed to learn dialectic, freedom of speech, be open-minded, accept an opinion that is not yours, and answer politely. That should be exactly what education is about. This is about that. And honestly, I don't think anymore that schools and universities should even teach about culture. I mean, we have the culture, we have everything. The knowledge is in our smartphone. We have it already. Okay, teach us how to find the good one, how to search, how to filter, and how to debate. This is the main, the main purpose of it today. The problem is that, yes, we are so influenced, and especially the generation who grew up with the social networks has been used to be bullied extremely, extremely young. They made their first step into debating with viewing, observing that anyone who have an opinion that is not exactly correct or not exactly the same as your friends can be bullied, can be censored, can be attacked, can be cancelled. So this is my main concern. I think we have a generation who is extremely, they say they are extremely sensitive. I think they are extremely, extremely bullied. And they are extremely afraid of saying, they are speaking all days about being who you want to be. Don't be afraid of being who you are. Yes, but speaking freely is part of it. Being able to say something that is probably not exactly correct, that might be controversial, that might be clumsy. It's part of growing. It's part of maturity. It's part of finding who you are. But if you see one of your friends being attacked by a mob that is canceling this person because for one word that has been not understood or out of his context, I mean, they have learned to actually shut up. This is what the main lesson of this education is. Stay silent. Silence yourself, control yourself, and also pretend to be on the same page, pretend to agree with everything. So the more violence, actually, this is, you see the law here. That means the more aggressive ones, the more who are determined to, especially you have a rule of identity now. The people who can speak, the people who cannot speak. So the people who can speak because they have the right identity, and then they can deliver the right speech. And there is a competition between the victim, the competition between who is the most aggressive and silent the other one. And at the end of the day, what you're going to obtain, you're going to obtain a society of people of goodwill and good faith who are going to, again, be terrified of speaking, but they are going to vote for the extreme right because you cannot control the mind of people. I mean, they suffer from that. So don't be surprised if the most aggressive supremacist right-wing is going to win from that. Because yes, people are going to vote for them. And that's also my main concern. I'm trying to alert the identitarian left to stop playing that game because it is absolutely helping the identitarian right, of course, in front of it, of course.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about the kind of major consequences of basically where does this lead, right? And it leads to various different places across different realms of society. I want to go back to characterizing this spirit because we've talked about where they live in person in some of these universities, online, but also I want to talk about what are their objects of discontent. So to go back to this paragraph that is in your prologue, you wrote, if only this specific left would scream against real dangers, it is polemical for nothing. Although they do have things that they're upset about. So I just made a kind of list here. These are all examples that come up. I'm sure these are examples that understandable to you and that you've encountered in your readings. So we hear about Madonna and Kim Kardashian's braids. We hear about Open Casket, which was a painting by Dana Schutz, displayed at the 2017 Whitney Biennial. We hear about blackface, yellowface, yoga classes in Canada, Jamie Oliver's recipe for jerk chicken, the play Cantana, the expression Hakuna Matata in The Lion King. I think broadly, if we kind of pull back, most of these discussions are basically saying who gets to represent who gets to speak for who, and is it possible to slip between identities? But also in the case of blackface and then Jamie Oliver's recipe for jerk chicken, surely some have, historically inflected, surely some are more serious than others. And I think in the spirit of keeping an open mind, of debating. Essentially, you know, you've been publicizing this book for now nearly 3 years. What is the most compelling argument against your argument that you've heard that you would maybe integrate into the book that came from the other side, that you thought, actually, this is a really good point?
That's a good question, and in good faith, I'm going to try to find one. I must say, I don't put, for example, on the same, but it's not the case in the book. I don't put on the same level discussion about blackface and the rise of Jamie Oliver or those kind of things. I think blackface has a special history in the US. It comes from clearly a racist theater history that should not be repeated without knowing. But it has also to be, for example, we had a polemic in Paris about a play inspired by the old Greek tradition of mask. And some students were so focused on the American actuality that they wanted to cancel a Greek play with mask that was coming from an ancient tradition, positive ancient tradition. And actually the play was, the whole message was about welcoming migrants. So I'm really trying to promote the fact that we need to think everything taking care of the context, taking in consideration the context and the intention. We cannot react like if we were robots, automatic robots, and we see, wow, this is blackface, cancel. No, just try to understand what is the context, what is the tradition here, what is the country, and what is the message, and what is the intention, who is behind it. But still, I understand that it's not, everything is not stupid. And some polemics should take place and are interesting debate, actually. I also understand that, of course, we have to be sensitive about who is speaking. Because again, but for me, it's not like, you know, based on the identity, who should or who should not touch some subjects. You need to take in consideration the intention. But that doesn't mean it's the same. It's not the same when someone is touching a subject and has no way to experiment it, that someone experiments it every day. That doesn't mean that this person, especially if you want to convince, especially about racism, if you want to convince white people to be less racist, you need to include them into the conversation. If you exclude them from the conversation, then you don't want to progress. You don't want to convince. You just want to stay between people who are convinced, who already know what racism is, and actually you want to promote yourself. You don't want to convince the bad or the racist. That's not true. So in terms of good arguments, I would say depend every time on the case. Where, when, who, what is the intention? And myself, sometimes I have many doubts. There is plenty of people I feel disturbed, I feel uncomfortable with me. I can also be uncomfortable sometimes. But I try to be fair about it and see, okay, what is the direction of it? But saying that, I cannot refrain to laugh sometimes, sorry, when I see polemics about, again, what Madonna is wearing. I'm fighting with, again, Algerian activists, Iranian activists. They are dying because of one hair out of their veil. And people are like, if they are fighting a genocide because Madonna is not wearing exactly what she should wear according to them. I mean, it's sometimes you feel that they are living in a bubble, a so spoiled bubble. They are so spoiled. They are just out of the world. Where do they live?
I guess there are two things to say, and I think the question was an unfair one, but I wanted to kind of list it in that way because it's true that when these conversations are being had online, there is a total flattening, and that one cause of polemic takes the place of another, and exactly to your point, context is totally mistaken. I guess the question I had while reading your book Because to some extent, you know, I agree that these issues are totally superficial and laughable or whatever, I mean, ridiculous, especially when, as you say, there are larger, more pressing issues. Do you get the sense that as the 21st century is kind of heating up, I mean, literally heating up, and as things are becoming more serious, you may have to look at the recent earthquake to realize that, you know, real issues are coming, that the thinking about the future, looking back on this moment, that once there really is increasing chaos, that they'll look back at this time and think it was just a bubble of ridiculousness, and it all was then eclipsed ultimately by much larger forces, the rise of populism, the arrival in full force of the climate crisis. I mean, in other words, you're fighting a fight here, but in some ways, these larger issues might just end up fighting the fight for you.
This is partly my hope. But no, you're right. Partly it's true. I think the larger issue are going to put everything in perspective and at the right place. I hope so. The problem is that we are talking about also the education of a whole entire generation and whole entire new elite of the world. So they have to be also smart enough, accurate enough, reasonable enough to deal with those large issues. Because if they have been educated in Yale and they have learned that the best way to be actually dominant is to point at someone because of his identity, to cancel it, and this is the way to avoid competition and to be at the top of the game. We are going to create, in the name of being woke, in the name of being kind, in the name of being sensitive, in the name of being listen to the other, we are actually creating monsters. People who are extremely dominant, extremely intolerant, extremely, and not smart, sorry, because when you don't exercise your mind by hearing other opinion and trying to convince and trying to find a common sense and trying to find common point, you're not exercised to lead the world in a way that can be for all, in an inclusive way, actually. You're not someone who is going to include other people. You have been trained to exclude first. So even to deal with big and larger issues, it's important to be an educated person who know how to deal with other point of view, other identity, other culture, and try to convince and try to give a speech or find, this is what I call universalism, where we find what is connecting us, what is the common points between all of us, and we try to enrich that, and we try to reinforce that instead of always insisting on the division, on what is the difference, on what make us incapable of understanding the point of view of the other. So it has real connection with what you mentioned, and sometimes people are telling me, but look, this is the young generation, they're going to grow up. Yes, they will, and one day they will be and honestly, I will be 20. I'm sure I will be one of them. I have no doubt about it. I've been there. Of course, we all been there. But still, they need to grow up a bit faster because they are extremely powerful. They're coming from the most educated families, the more rich families. They are in the most prestigious universities. They are connected to the Silicon Valley. They are actually the masters of the world. And they have an impact on our, also in Europe, culture industry. They are the one who decide what film we can do, what book we can write, what discussion and debate we can have. So I hope they're going to grow a bit more, yes, a bit more quickly, let's say.
I want to ask you two more questions, and then we'll turn to this group discussion. So please start thinking about what you want to ask and say. I think very much this point of exclusionary and elitist, there's a whole language that these groups use, that the offended generation use, and you use their language in the book, and it's always very humorously in italics because, of course, it's coming from the English language. None of it is really French. So identity politics, cultural appropriation, safe spaces, which then I think was humorously called this just same spaces, trigger warnings, microaggressions, politically correct. I mean, I could go on and on. Out of all of these, I guess, shorthands or concepts, which for you is the most pernicious and possibly bizarre?
I think I would pick the trigger warnings. I love them. I love the idea that when
Can you explain? Does everyone know what a trigger warning is? No,
you're
yes.
not all prepared to that. Let's say that before having this conversation, we should have told you, and more teachers feel they have to in some universities. Look, you should know that you're going to hear maybe some disturbing words and facts. Before to having this conversation, before to, for example, studying a book, some teachers now are forced to say, dear students, there is disturbing event into that books, you know, and maybe you're going to feel uncomfortable. So please, if you feel too emotional about it, leave the room before. That means that when you are studying, for example, Gatsby the Magnificent, I don't know if
The
you
Great
can,
Gatsby.
the Great Gatsby. Yes, there is brutal sex, there is rape, there is awful thing into that book. This is literature. You're not, I mean, you don't become a rapist because you're reading a book about rape. You're not, I had this conversation with an homophobe a long time ago that was, so he's a conservative, and he wanted to forbid the cartoons where two fish were kissing, two boy fish were kissing. It was a cartoon to educate against homophobia and for young people. And he, on TV, he said one day, I don't want my son to see this cartoon. I don't want my son to become homosexuals. And I told him, you know, they are not going to become homosexual because they see two fish kissing each other. They are not going to become fish either, actually. Fiction doesn't work this way. It turned that his two sons became gay a long time after, but I swear it's not because of the cartoons. And I cannot give you the name of this extremely known extreme right politician. But going back to the leftist side of it, it's the same mentality. You cannot read something that is brutal, even if you experimented something extremely brutal into your life, even if you've been victim of those facts, those terrible things that can happen in life. I think it's actually healing to know that there is people telling story about it. And it's not, again, the mission of a teacher is not a psychoanalyst. If you need to heal, if you feel too sensitive, you can find for help, you can search for help. But a classroom, it's not safe for, it's not supposed to be safe for ideas, or at the contrary, it's supposed to be safe for debate, for teaching, for ideas. It's not going to be a psychoanalyst room. It's not the case. So I would love, and I can use some of the word you mentioned. I can use safe, but less. Let's make university safe place for teaching. That's is supposed to be. And not same place. Yes, not place where you feeling good because you're only with people who think the same as you. That's not right. That's not university. That can be your living room. Okay, let's go have dinner with your friends. No problem. You don't need to pay a fortune for that. University, you pay a lot. Please enjoy the company of other people and teachers. But there is some words I can honestly find accurate. There is one word that speaks to me, non-binary, for example. This is something in my generation, we were saying more androgyne, androgynous,
androgynous.
Androgynous. Now, okay, we say non-binary. That's fine with me. I love it. I love the fact that the young generation is claiming for more fluid definition of gender. That's if the point, and I agree with that, is to be more fluid. Let's be fluid about everything. Let's try to seek for mixing people and not, again, putting boundaries between them. Don't go from non-binary identities to binary ideas. Try to promote that in every space of your life. And I'm pretty sure they will, honestly, again. I'm pretty sure they will. The problem is, if you look at the mood inside the American university, we are waiting now for 30 years that's an improvement, and it's getting worse and worse, unfortunately. If it is now touching the European universities that, again, are educating the leaders of the future world. Maybe one day, thanks to a big sense of humor, we're going to solve the problem. But waiting that, we're going to lose books, we're going to lose films, and we are going to lose a lot of connection, and the polarization is going to be worse and worse and worse. And you know that, I think, and everyone now knows, that democracies are extremely fragile and they can die from polarization. So we still should hurry up in in healing in a different way.
Thank you. I wanted to read again. This is in your epilogue, and this is kind of the solution and also the call to arms, because you're very, we were saying this before, to actually continue to have this conversation does take a lot of courage. You point this out. You have to be totally openly prepared for constant pushback, more than pushback. So you write, what does this look like? This requires a certain amount of courage to argue with friends and comrades, to endure being called a racist, as Islamophobe. Is terribly painful, I mean, especially given your background. Yet we must brave intimidation if we want to stop the identity war. This revival requires that we no longer accept absurd cultural appropriation lawsuits, to reclaim seats and positions at universities, to relearn to defend equality and not only diversity. Ultimately, at the end, you say, this tyranny of offense suffocates us. It's time to breathe. It's time to relearn how to defend equality without harming liberties. Thank you. Can we have a round of applause? Thank you. Are there any questions or comments based? Yes, lots. Okay.
I wanted to do PhD at SciencePo, and then I decided not to apply because I think the freedom of expression at SciencePo does not exist as far as the Indian studies are concerned. I would not like to take the name of the professor because I respect him a lot. He's very passionate about India. But there's a certain political orientation as far as the Indian studies are concerned at SciencePo, and it's the same case at EHSS as well. I've attended lots of conferences where research scholars working on India from SciencePo and EHSS present, and it's very sad to see that freedom of expression does not exist. So my question, I will not go on the Indian side, it's very fundamental. Is it possible for a political science professor to separate his ideologies, what he thinks himself, his own personal opinions, based on his personal experience or choices, separate it from what he teaches the kids so that they think independently without having the bias, and let them nourish and let them do well for the society, for France or US or for any other country? That's my question. Thank you.
It's, of course, a hard exercise. Thank you for your question. I think it's a bit the same with journalism. I would say that I don't believe at all that we are neutral human beings. That doesn't exist. Or, yes, maybe if you are completely empty, but I think any alive creature has actually ideas. And so subjectivity. So the question is to, yes, the separation between church and state. Of course, you can be religious and live in a society that is secular, but you have to establish certain rules. And one of the rules is, especially when you are teaching, you're supposed to engage and encourage your students to think by themselves. That means that doesn't mean you're going to be completely, again, neutral or avoid to say what do you think, but you are going to try to make them think different ways, try to be free to try different approach, and make them, again, because this is the reverse, safe about trying different approaches. So this separation is an exercise, it's a movement, it's not like a big wall, it's just being honest about yourself, what you try to do, and decide that the goal is to create an environment for freedom of thinking. At the end, everyone has a bias. Okay, but at least we can have multiple ones in the same room, and no one is going to die. It's a big beginning. It's a good beginning.
Thank you.
So I'm actually from Indiana, and part of my family lives in Florida. So I have a different political discussion with my family than most people who go to Yale, I would imagine. And I think it's important to look at these situations too, that a lot of the ideas that come from the elites, and I mean, this is just, for a lot of people, this is just kind of a new thing, but a continuation of what's been around for a long time, which is that the middle class and the working class get these ideas thrown upon them. You know, for example, busing. I have an aunt who has 6 children. At one point, she had children in 5 different schools in a small city called Fort Wayne, Indiana, that has maybe like 200,000 people. But yet, even back then, it was very common to accuse somebody who complained about busing as being racist. Not to mention, you know, there's a whole, I mean, what's the word for it, I guess. I think the list is very long. I went to UCLA, and it was right at the beginning of the political correct, like what we call political correctness back then, but it was always the same thing. It seems like, you know, people are making these virtuous declarations. I think it's called virtue signaling, but yet the people who have to carry out a lot of these policies tend to be working and middle class, which kind of gets me back to what you were talking about, like white supremacy and people going to the right. I'm not sure it's completely irrational, because they know that these are the policies that are going to play out with them. They are the ones who can't find a private school. They are the ones who can't get another job and move. You know, where I'm from, there's also a lot of coal mining. And I wonder if you have, I don't know if you have an opinion on that, because I really appreciate the fact that you said this is going to push people to the far right, but is it irrational for them to move to the far right? And then there was just one other thing I wanted to mention in your list. You didn't bring up what I think is the most polemic subject at the moment, which is transgender. And I'm curious, did you guys
You want us all dead
Yeah.
tonight?
No, because I just like to point out, sorry,
Yeah.
is that I did actually ask for 2 books here at the American Library that were pretty neutral, maybe explore transgender subject from a different angle that wasn't 100% positive and affirmative, but not mean. And it took the American Library well over 6 months to bring them in, and only because but if you look in the children's section, there's a lot of very, very positive trans stories. And there's nothing about detransitioning. And I think if you talk about book banning, not putting books on the shelf is very important too. Sorry, I had just felt, since it wasn't on the list, I thought it had to be mentioned.
It's interesting. I hear what you're saying. I understand that, because also my specialty is to work on extreme right. I mean, I spent 20 years studying what push people to vote for the extreme. And I'm not saying there is only irrationality. I mean, there is also people who feel, again, not included into the conversation at one point, or feel that the policy, yes, are going to help only some and not them. I'm really concerned about the fact that instead of being inclusive and convincing for people who have difficulty to use all of these new words, new paradigms, and etc., instead of being patient and being tolerant actually with the fact that some can be also clumsy sometimes, and you still, it's all about the political correctness. Look, I'm still a feminist and anti-racist activist. I do believe that there is certain words we should be absolutely banned or avoid, except if you want to study them or debate about them. So then we should be able to pronounce them without being afraid. For example, into movies, some movies speaking about the old times, they should be allowed to use those words because this was the vocabulary of those times. And this is erasing history to pretend that we can yes, reshape everything and erase memory because we are afraid of the word, because we don't want this word to be used now. But we have to be patient and we have to be tolerant. For example, the example of the inclusive language. I don't know if you say this in the same in English, the inclusive language. That is extremely complex. Even for a feminist, it's extremely complex to understand exactly where you put the point, the 2 point, the he, etc. So actually the only one who know how to use it are the ones who have been to those universities, learn that. And if you throw it onto the people saying, what, you don't know how to use it? You don't know, you don't spell correctly this, you are not using the right word, you're sexist. Yes, but it's just about how you again include someone into the conversation or just create. Yeah. But what? Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's fantastic.
No, you agree.
Well, there'll be time to talk after. Are there any other questions or possible comments? Yes.
Hi. I think of the debate of left and right as mainly an economic debate about where the resources are allocated. And I noticed that this kind of these people seldom discuss economic policy, and rather that capitalism seems to be at some kind of an arguable core of the things that they say. So I was wondering if we're not letting them have left as a term that represents them a bit too quickly. Like, why are they the left?
Still, because they are invoking progressive concept to promote this approach. But I understand what you mean in the sense that I think we are dealing with also a focalization on identity politic that avoid a big conversation about inequalities. There is plenty of authors who say that, and myself, I find myself in a position very different than 20 years ago. 20 years ago, when I was a gay activist and a feminist activist fighting for equal rights, I was dealing with leftists, political leaders telling me, look, this is not the priority. Speaking about discrimination, homophobia, sexism, racism, it's not a priority. We should all focus on equality, social equality. And when it will be the big night that we're dreaming about, because communism is less, they were obviously and hoping for a sort of communist big night, then everybody will be equal and those problems will be solved. That was a mistake of actually the communists, to think that you promote an equal, absolutely equal by force and by state society and it will erase any stereotypes, problem of racism, sexism, homophobia. It has nothing to do with it. So I'm coming from a left who think that those issues are still absolutely critical, important, and we have to deal with them. And no matter you are rich or poor, we should progress on that. We should speak, we should be patient, we should be tolerant, but we should progress about that. But I am more and more struck by the fact that extremely rich and privileged people are talking a lot about this those days, like if it is the main issue, because they have really less and less to propose about fighting inequalities. And this is leading to a world where, and we're coming back from the previous intervention, when what we call now the white trash, the people who feel who feel that the Democrats doesn't speak to them anymore sometimes. And at the same time, I feel that they are actually not, they don't have the money to go to the university. They are struggling for jobs. They are struggling for their life. And they don't feel included into the conversation about equality. And that creates a big misunderstanding, and that creates a big problem, because then, yes, of course, they're going to vote for the right wing that is defending freedom and speak to them. Because if no one has a solution about, again, reducing inequalities, which are still, and even worse than before, on the table, and there is a subject, I think it's extremely symptomatic about it. It's the question of the affirmative action to enter university. I understand that at the beginning, in a post-segregated world, the issue was to say, look, we stop with the traditional box, and we're going to move to many boxes you can invoke to have certain rights and to have certain facility to go to the university. But the fact that it is based on ethnic criteria instead of social ones is just dividing people. It's just putting people into competition, because now we have Black students coming from immigration that have to justify themselves to benefit from the affirmative action, while some American Black students coming from, because who have parents who have been slave, are telling them, it's not for you. Affirmative action has been implemented for us. So and the Jewish students are scared to say, I'm part of a certain minority too. The homosexual doesn't know if they belong to the list or not. And everyone, I think it created an atmosphere of competition between minorities that is extremely unhealthy, actually. While if you had another approach saying just, poor parents should be helped, and there should be fundings, state fundings for people who cannot afford to send their kids to university. It will include most of the people coming from slave parents, because we know that the impact of slavery mostly is to deprive you from the capital, from what you need also to be successful. So it will include mostly the people who can today benefit from affirmative action, but it doesn't divide the minority. It doesn't put them in victimization competition. So this is an approach that should be, and still, I'm sorry, in these terms, there is left and right, because the right wing is not concerned about helping people who need more help. It's, more you succeed on your own. The state is not here to correct inequalities. I do believe that state should correct inequalities, not putting everyone at the same level. It will never, never, never happen. But giving more to the people who have less, it's helping society, it's good for the benefit of all. But again, you have to choose the right criteria. And there is criteria who are uniting people instead of putting them at competition. And I think it's one of the biggest mistakes. And I think the beginning of the problem started there. Because you can also have, and we avoid that in France. And believe me, we had this conversation. I remember at one point under the Sarkozy presidency, we were about to go into that direction. One of the ministers of Sarkozy wanted to promote ethnic affirmative action. And he offered that, one of the main prestigious school in France named ENA that has been reformed. ENA, it's really where only the elite know where ENA is and send kids. The other one doesn't even know what it is. He wanted to have a criteria for ethnic affirmative action that would have helped 2.5% per 2% per year on ethnic base. And of course, because I'm studying National Front, I was seeing it. I was seeing what Marine Le Pen could do with it. Say, you are, and the guy who was promoting it on a TV debate, one day I confronted him. He was coming from a Black organization and was saying, we want this. I said, Patrick, because we knew each other, Patrick, your father was a minister. You know where ENA is. You don't need any help based on ethnicity to find the door. The child of workers, of employees, who don't even know where ENA is, are going to hate you. They're going to become more racist for 2 seats in 1 year. This is insane. And of course, extreme right will use it. We avoid that, fortunately, because we are still containing extreme right the way we can. But honestly, I'm pretty sure that if we would have done those mistakes, maybe Marine Le Pen would be president today. And if she was president today, I'm pretty sure that racism will be extremely high in this country, even more than it is. So when you fight, even for justice, you have to be strategist sometimes. You have to think on the long run and not only on the short win point you can have. And sometimes I have the feeling that this generation of activists, they want a seat for themselves. I'm not sure they want a better world, actually. When I see them coming at every event saying, we want to sit at the table, and most of the time they are pointing at someone because they want this chair. Exactly. Give me your chair. I want your seat at the table. Come on, just fight for a bigger table that everyone can sit. Stop claiming the seat of someone else. That's for me, this is activism. That's for me equality. This is why I'm saying that we have to find to go back to the fight for equality, because the fight for diversity that so many companies are happy with, it's just another competition. It's not a different world. It's not a better world, actually. It's just you change, you take the seat of someone else.
Thank you. Can we have a big final round of applause?